Hey, and welcome to the Reset Podcast. Everything you need to know that your therapist probably never told you. Researched by experts, real life experiences. This is Reset. Hey, and welcome back to the Reset Podcast. We're so happy that you are with us. This is going to be the third episode of the three-part series that Joe and Casey have been doing on teens. If you missed episode 1 and 2, just jump back on our Reset Podcast page and make sure to catch up. We hope you enjoy the last part of this series.
That they cannot wait till they go away to college to get a fresh start and be something different, or honestly, not just different. Go back to really a reset of who they are, which is their authentic self.
I agree. And I think that goes back to the idea of why some of them fear ultimately progress and health, right? Because they're actually being known for their dysfunction and dysregulation. And so to abandon that feels like they're abandoning themselves and their identity. And so they'll sit in that instead, even when it doesn't feel authentic. And so vulnerability has now just changed face, it feels like. Like there's, again, false vulnerability that people are online or just in basic conversation having these, what appears to me on the surface looks like these really deep talks, right? You're talking about your mental health to like anyone that listens. Whereas when I grew up, that was something very hush-hush. Or something we only, like you said, kept for safe conversations. But now they show up in what looks like, quote, vulnerability, but I think it's a facade of vulnerability, and it's a very rigid vulnerability in the fact that it's not an integrated version of vulnerability where you can be vulnerable about both strength and weakness, about both health and unhealthiness. There's a one-sided vulnerability about unhealthiness and dysfunction that doesn't, again, feel authentic, if that makes sense. But there's no integration of like, there's these other parts of me as well. There's only this zoomed in version of what's wrong.
Well, it makes me think of pornography. Pornography, oddly enough, has made pornography's always been there for kids, for teenagers, but it's made a huge comeback in my practice since COVID hit, where I think, once again, sense of belonging, sense of wanting to feel connected, maybe at a physical level with others they couldn't. So then pornography came, a big part of our kids' life. And I always feel like pornography has always been an active enemy with our teenagers. But man, it really made a big comeback. The weird part about it is, what's different now about pornography is there's no shame around it. These kids talk about pornography with their friends, share it openly with emails or texts or DMs, and they talk about it, and some of them, they watch it together, and some of them, it happens as if it's no big deal. And I go back to is, things like this was always seen as being shameful and having a lot of guilt around it. And then pornography is so consumed, by the way, not just with males, with females too. We're seeing a lot of that. Pornography now has a different, in many ways, identity with kids, where it's something where if you're not watching it or if you're not into it, once again, there's something wrong with you. I would say, it wasn't that long ago where if you were the one watching pornography or even introducing it to, or trying to introduce it to your peers, there's something wrong with you. In this case, it's like the opposite. And so a lot of these good kids, once again, they want to belong. So do I say yes or no? Well, I say yes, and they get introduced to some really hard realities with pornography that really, and we know what it does to an adult brain, but and now we know what it does with a young, immature brain. And they once again, all the wrong ways of doing a math problem, all the wrong ways to gain a sense of belonging, all wrong ways to feed your intimacy appetite, all the wrong ways.
And I think what we're seeing with pornography is that there's actually multiple avenues that get some of our kiddos there. And you touch on one of them, but I think another thing is that I think the developmental ages of the teenage years has always been identity formation, but I would say we're in like an identity crisis right now, and our culture, or identity, really pandemic in the teenage years. And so I think there's more pressure to have this form of identity. And because of that, sexuality being a huge part of it more recently, I'm having a lot of kiddos stumble on pornography through honestly trying to have curiosity and even education around that piece of their identity, because there's so much talk about it in our culture. Again, growing up in my years, we didn't talk much about sexuality in that way, but now it is a very common and prevalent conversation as young as my middle schoolers come in and talk about it. And so I think sometimes Googling from a place of curiosity or even a place of education then leads to a video, and then et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and let's just be clear. Here's where our kids are finding pornography. They're finding it through Instagram has pornography.
Snapchat.
Netflix has pornography. We know that they get it through screen recordings, and then they text us. They get texts from their friends, videos. They get pornography through TikTok. Did I say TikTok already?
You did not.
TikTok doesn't take much for that feed to get dark.
You know what's one that I feel like you and I worked on a case, and at least I was pretty shocked, and I love this platform, but we had a client that was using Pinterest in an inappropriate way.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Pinterest has it. Oddly enough, Facebook has it. And I've had clients talk about how YouTube, they've tried to find YouTube videos that are pornography before YouTube is able to get them off, where these videos will have certain verbiage that shows it's not pornography. It reminds me of like what the whitehouse.com used to be one of the big porn sites back in the day. Now it's not anymore, so don't look it up. But it's like the language, like these kids are finding the language around pornography that is like, if parents are searching for the keywords like, let's say, nudity or sex, that's not it anymore. We're finding out is there's this underlining like secret code where kids could look up and search and find it on these different platforms. That is, honestly, I go back to it, it's a active enemy in our kids' world that doesn't take much for it to stumble on our kids' feeds, which is so sad. And
I remember when we first started doing the talk that we used to call Teens and Screens, that now is just screens, because really any age has access to screens at this point. But remember the research that they were showing kids getting introduced to pornography at a very young age. I mean, we're talking like it was 6 or 7. It was something really heartbreakingly sad. But do you remember that we were going through all that research, and it said one of the main ways young boys were actually having access to pornography was through Google searching something as innocent as Hot Wheels. And with enough clicks, remember, it got to hot something else. And before we knew it, they were in pornography. But it started from literally a Google search of Hot Wheels. And as a parent, right, if you're going through search history, that's not going to alarm you. But enough clicks away, Hot Wheels can become something else.
Does anyone play with Hot Wheels anymore?
Yes.
Who Googles Hot Wheels? That's when I hear this research. I was like, remember that one that said like the third, or when it was the third or the fourth most search? I think it's the fourth most search word for like 11-year-old was porn on Google. Remember that one?
Yeah.
I was like, how do they know that?
This is the segment of the show where we talk about ancient proverbs. Useful thoughts that we still use today. Thoughts that are deep and show us the way. Wisdom, lessons, teaching. Throw out your doubt, search what's inside. Let's go find out, let's go deep, not wide. Ancient proverbs. Ancient proverbs. Ancient proverbs. Another season, another segment, so they say.
Well, and I'm excited about this one because I love my ancient proverbs. Every time I say the word ancient, I think
it's ancient.
Okay, see, here we are again. Lego. So we are at it. I get it. I have a speech impediment my whole life, and you just bully me because of it.
Oh my gosh, but that's a little extreme.
It's A-okay. I will get through this.
Okay.
But there's a good one I like to use, and it says this: you go after 2 rabbits and you get none.
Okay.
And the concept of it is, if you are pursuing 2 different things, you're not going to be good at any of them. You're not going to achieve any of them. You're just not going to get any of them, right? And so you can't go after 2 rabbits and get 1. You have to double down. You have to focus, which to me is so important, especially with a new year, because the major word around a lot of my clients I'm working with is that this is the year we're going to focus. this is the year we're going to double down. This is the year we're going to have discipline. This is the year that we're going to kind of cut the fat off the meat and just be disciplined and focusing on what we really want to achieve or pursue. And I think so much of last year, people went wide and there's just an abundance of width, but not when it comes to going deep, having depth in life.
Why do you think last year specifically?
I think people are coming out of COVID, more abilities and opportunities last year. There's more just people getting out of that fog, that they were in. And so they just I want abundance. They just wanted a lot. And they're just kind of consuming as much as they can mentally, emotionally, financially, occupational, whatever it may be. And I think this is the year, okay, we need to go deep. We need to focus. If that's in relationships, if that's in the concept of, if it's business, whatever it may be, that whatever your 2 rabbits or 3 or 4 or 10 rabbits were last year, let's just focus on that one.
And along with trying to pursue 2 different things and not achieving either of those, there was probably no room for margin. There was no room just fill in the blank when you wanted to, because you were putting so much energy, so much focus into these things that then sadly were never obtained.
Well, it's just like in business and relationships. It's like, give me a guy who's trying to date 2 girls at the same time. He's going to get none.
Yeah. You hear that out there, bros?
Well, it's a lot like how, like Tinder and Hinge is like, you're going after 100 girls and odds are you're not going to get one. It's like you put your focus and energy on one, most likely that's going to be successful. And then business is kind of like the concept in which, really focusing, knowing what your business is. If you're trying to be multiple things, it's just not going to work. And that's why niche business works. That's why finding a niche, pursuing a niche, and doubling down and pursuing that one rabbit is so important, because it ends up creating results. So a lot of it has to do with knowing where you want to put your energy at, knowing where you want to put your focus at, your time, money, whatever that is, knowing where to put that in is so important in achieving or getting that result you're looking for, and where that may be.
That's what I was just going to ask you, is what are some advice tips you have to narrowing it down? Is it making maybe a big list and then saying what is actually going to be something that I could pursue, that could happen? Asking advice around from friends and family? How do we narrow it down? How do we get there?
Well, I think it always starts with self-awareness and knowing who you are and what you want, where that may be. And once again, business, relationships, what it may be. I think it's also understanding is, what do you want the end result to look like? And so it's kind of working the funnel backwards. What do I want my end result to be in, fill in the blank, this? That's it. Okay, so what do I need to then double down to get there? I was thinking about Warren Buffett, the second, first wealthiest man in the world. What he does with his employees every year is he makes them write down 25 goals that they have this year. And then after that, he has them cross off or circle 5 of those 25. And then the rest of them, he crosses them off. He says the 20 that you crossed off, those are called distractions. And so then the 5 are the only ones you're allowed to put energy towards. Even though all 25 are good things, we're all 25 goals for you to achieve. But the 25 is like the 2 rabbits. And so then he says, here's the 5 goals that we need to achieve this year. Here's the 5 we're going to double down on. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else is fruitless. And this is where the fruit's going to be for what we're pursuing.
That's great. I love that.
Now back to the show.
Let's switch the topic, because there's nothing like talking about teens and porn. It just enlightens people's days. Let's talk about, and there's so much about teenagers that we could discuss and talk about. And obviously we didn't talk about our teenagers that are dealing with eating disorders or body image issues or sexuality issues or gender issues. Just because I think there's so much to that there's just no way we can, when we start talking about that stuff, we got to go deep for a few hours, I feel like, when it comes to just pathology around that. But there's a lot of teenagers now that are in therapy. Teenagers are seeking therapy. First time ever, teenagers want a therapist, especially a lot of our college kids. They want you don't have to force, majority of our clients are not forced to come in to see us. The ones that do, we win them over with our personality and our great looks. And so...
And charm.
And charm, of course. All heart. And so we get a lot of our parents asking us, what is our role? What is the parent's role when their teen is in therapy? And a lot of parents get they get anxious. Your kid goes behind a closed door. I do all mine over Zoom. So if it's over Zoom, what's being said? Are you, is the right stuff being said? Are you brainwashing our kids? Like, what's going on? And I think the reality of it overall is we're like a wise friend. That's why I kind of always say our role is a wise friend. And, really probably saying a lot of stuff that the parents are saying to the kids, but it's a different person. So I think it comes off differently. But I think about going back to what parents' role is. And I know we really try to coach our parents on a few things. I think one thing is don't make therapy another achievement, meaning asking your kid, are you getting better? Making it something that it's about, in so many ways about getting a success or failure mentality around it. Instead, ask questions like this. Do you feel connected to your therapist? Do you feel heard in therapy? Do you feel that your therapist understands you? Those are the 3 questions that are my go-tos. And it's also 3 questions that as parents, we hope that our kids would say yes to when it comes to our own relationship.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that things that shouldn't be said is things like, are you getting better?
Are we almost done with this? That's one I get a lot.
Yes. And then parents talk about, do you know how much this is costing me? Mm-hmm. Are you just talking about your life? There's certain statements that we hear consistently with unhealthy parents that really does ruin the therapeutic dynamic and relationship, and the therapy sessions become or evolve around the parent, around the teenager talking about the parent who just is putting a lot of pressure on therapy, and it's just not healthy.
And I think the coin has flipped a little bit. That I would say in years past, right, there was the resistance from teenagers. We did get that sometimes, but we've talked about, and recently that is not the case. You don't have to convince a lot of these teenagers to come into therapy. Most of them are thirsty for it and wanting it. I'm seeing more so, I think the parents are now more fearful of therapy. What does that mean to me as a parent if my child is in therapy, or children? We see families sometimes, right? Or children are in therapy. What are they saying about us as parents? I sometimes even have parents, it feels like, try and convince me that they're not bad parents, and I was like, I don't think that whatsoever, and nor do your children. But they have their own anxiety about their children going to therapy, and I think they project some of that fear onto their children, and then it becomes this performance-based mentality of how do we do therapy right. And so again, I think the coin flipped in the way that it's not kids being resistant and fearful of therapy. And what does that mean if I'm in it? I think it's parents, and that fear and that anxiety gets projected as pressure onto the kids.
Well, that's actually a good point. I think that's exactly what's going on. I think about the current teenagers, their own kids, when they want or asking for therapy, they're like, well, of course, that's normal. I enjoy mine, or I went through it. I had certain hard times and difficulties. I also think the fact is that teenagers who go to therapy are healthy. And teenagers who don't want to do therapy or non-therapy a lot of times are unhealthy. It's the healthy people that go to therapy. The people who want to look at blind spots and get better. People who want to have a certain aspect of, I'm here and I want to get there. How do I do it? People who want to understand strategy and tools to be a healthier version of themselves. All this is good. The kids who are in therapy, teenagers in therapy, adults who are in therapy, they're usually the healthy ones. There's a healthy aspect for yourself to actually say, I want help. Mm-hmm. That's called vulnerability. And there's something beautiful about that. It's just like we're talking about the aspect of sports. A lot of times we tell our kiddos have sports, it's like, I love watching you play. When's the last time we had that wrapped around even like healthy behaviors of like, even, I love watching you do self-care. I love watching you taking time away for yourself. I love the fact that you're in therapy and improving yourself. Mm-hmm. We kind of need to start using that language around what we consider to be emotional wellness and taking care of self. And I think that's something that we need to start doing, especially when it comes to our teenagers.
Well, I think allowing them to go to therapy, right, is also modeling self-care and modeling how, again, to connect with yourself. Again, we're the most connected generation, but most disconnected from self. And so therapy is a way to connect with oneself. And so we don't ever shame people or think, I think, ill towards our athletes who ask mom and dad, hey, can I get a hitting coach, right? I really want to focus on hitting. Can I get a trainer? I want to get my speed and agility up. When a kid comes up to you and says, I need a math tutor, like we would never, I think, put people down or think other when our kids are asking and advocating for support in the arts, in the athletics, in the academics. But yet there is a different response when they're asking and advocating for additional support with self. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Well, and I go back to like you're saying is a lot of parents feel like they're a failure if the kid needs to go to therapy, and that's the biggest lie. If anything is a success, you know, our kids are going to go to therapy. One of them already does.
Yeah, let's go.
Not because we're broken as parents, it's because we recognize and we're ahead of what we consider to be future issues or problems that may come up. And as parents, we want to inherit and bring people into our kids' lives who are great influencers in a good way, who are just great mentors. And a therapist can be that. We know, at least for us, and we talk about this a lot, is that mom and dad are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so in therapy, in session, we think as if like, if mom and dad had their ears against the door, what do they want us to say to their kid? In terms of them feeling loved, them feeling heard, nurturing and nourishing, not just the child, but also the family relationship and how important that is. And we're not here to divide or create division. It's the complete opposite. Now, are all therapists made equal? No. And that's probably something we got to talk about a different day. How to find the right therapist, how to find the right person. Is it personality driven? Is it more driven towards, modalities or different skills they have? No, yes, no, and yes. But the reality of it is for teenagers, if they can't connect and relate to their therapist or their mental health coach, it's the wrong person. If they don't feel heard, it's the wrong person.
And I even, on the onset of therapy, in that first session, I bring that up with all of my clients, is that like I work from a place of relationship and connection. And I think that therapy can only be as affected as our relationship is connected. And so throughout therapy, I'm always checking in with my clients. How are you and I doing? How are we connecting? I'm also modeling how to have healthy relationship, right? Because you should be connecting with your friends, your partner, your family, and reflecting on the relationship, right? And so I totally echo that point. And I think that's what we've done a really good job in our practice of doing and working so well with teenagers, is that we really come from a place of connection and really meeting the client where they are. And talking about kind of parents allowing for therapy, I always think, the teenage years, we've talked about it. It's identity formation, but there's a very fragile sense of self during the teenage years. And so what we're wanting to do is build that self. But in order to build that self, we have to choose the mirrors in which our children are looking into.
Yes.
Have your therapist be one of those mirrors. That's going to be a healthy mirror. The problem is a lot of our teens with that fragile sense of self, they are seeking unhealthy mirrors. And I have the image almost like, when you go to the fair and you have that clown house and you look in the mirror and you're all distorted. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of teenage years is looking in that distorted mirror, and it might be their peers. It might be social media. It might be whomever it could be, right? A therapist can be a really healthy and adaptive mirror for your teen to go from a fragile self to a healthy self.
Yes. I'll end on this for us is some parents we know parents want help or they have questions and they just need extra, just guidance. Starting next year, 2023, you and I are starting to do what we call a lunch and learn. So if you're a parent of I would say fifth grader or older through the college years.
Yeah.
And you want to hear some imparting advice about what we're seeing currently in the culture, kind of like we're doing right now. because it's always changing, because we see it firsthand, just being in the trenches with teens. Or you like me, I really want some, quick advice or opportunity to just ask scenario questions anonymously. Well, go to our website, theresetgroup.com. And on there, you're going to see a lunch and learn opportunity where you can sign up. And starting next year, twice a month, we're going to have a 1 hour imparting information and opportunity to question and answers revolving anything. It could be about screens. It could be about discipline. It could be about academics. It could be about athletics. It could be about to how to be a better parent, or it could be about, hey, my kid's going through this. What advice do you have on that? We just want that to be available because so many parents want support, but they don't necessarily want to go to therapy, or they necessarily don't want to, to go to a therapist to talk about this. They just want quick answers or have opportunity to just get feedback from professionals. That's starting next year. Check it out at theresetgroup.com. Lunch and Learn for parents.
That concludes the 3-part series on teens with Joe and Casey. We hope that you glean some wisdom, and we hope that you feel encouraged to raise your teen in the world that we're living in today. Thank you so much for being here and listening to the Reset Podcast. We're so glad that you joined us. If you enjoyed this episode, we want to hear from you. Can you leave us a review, a rating, or maybe even hit that subscribe button, or share it with a friend that needs to hear it? We work with individuals, athletes, couples, and teams to overcome mental barriers that are holding them back from reaching their maximum potential. If that sounds like you, learn more about what we do at theresetgroup.com. We would love to connect with you on social media, so be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at The Reset Group. See you next time.